and welcome to Can't Put It Down. It's an audio LAN party. My name's Matt, and I use he, him pronouns.
My name is Kim. I use she, her pronouns.
I'm going to tell you that we're going to be talking about 1000xRESIST today, but if you were listening to this in the preview on the main feed, you may be like, Matt, what the fuck is going on? And what's happening is that I am putting out a new paid show called Can't Put It Down. I've been making YouTube videos since COVID, really, and I have been doing Can't Let It Go with AC for about a year and a half. And really, I have two things that I want. One is I want Can't Let It Go to pay for itself. It is not super expensive, but it's just something that like I would like to be self-sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
And two, I really want to be intentional about the things I say I want to do with the YouTube channel, which is making that work a part of my income. Which is to say, if you're hearing this on the preview on the main feed for Can't Let It Go, you can go to ko-fi.com/Matt Horton. And if you set up a monthly recurring donation of any amount, like $1 or more, basically, you'll get access to this show, Can't Put It Down, and any other members only content that I might share there. I will say future episodes of Can't Put It Down will have maybe me, maybe AC, largely probably both of us. But on this one, I asked Kim to participate with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me as the first guest. I'm so honored.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this game. And actually, it's more than just this episode. For the launch of the Ko-Fi, I'm going to go with Ko-Fi. I got to commit.
Nice. We say it every possible way on .zip. So I applaud you for committing to consistency.
The company itself has said it kind of doesn't matter. They like Ko-Fi.
Okay.
They also said, say it however you want. But for the launch of the Ko-Fi, I have done two things, which is this first episode of Can't Put It Down, as well as a video over on my YouTube channel. There'll be a link in the show notes and over at matthorton.live that is more my standard YouTube thing. It's a video essay about the game. It's mixed in with portions of this podcast, but also a really awesome interview that Kim and I got to do yesterday with Sunset Visitor, the developers of this game.
That was so rad.
Yeah, I literally I was shaking from happiness after it was over.
Yeah, that was really, really fun to get to do. I feel like every question I asked was just a word salad and then right. But I that was a really great time. Thank you for involving me in that. And big thanks to Remy and Pinky for giving us their time. That was so cool.
Yeah. If you get into this episode and you're like, hey, I want to hear the whole thing, go over to the Ko-Fi, set up a recurring donation, and you can hear the rest of it.
Not to brag, but I have just become the first member. Oh shit, I think I did it on... No, it's fine. I used my credit card. It's fine. Okay. I did it from the .zip account.
Well, I appreciate .zip for supporting the Ko-Fi page. So like I said, today we're going to talk about 1000xRESIST, which is a video game by Sunset Visitor, and it's published by Fellow Traveler, who are starting to become a publisher that I just expect the best from at all times. Mm-hmm. We're going to go in full spoiler zone. Other podcasts might do a thing where they're like, hey, we're going to do a spoiler marker. Can't Let It Go and my YouTube have never been those places. I am full spoiler all the time.
All of the secrets will be revealed immediately.
But it's also, I think, and I think you might agree with this, Kim, is because I don't know that there's a way to talk about 1000xRESIST after you've played it without seeing all of the things that are set up in the beginning of the game and understanding the meaning that those things provide.
Yeah, it's so thematically rich, and that the themes and the kind of hints about what's going on under the surface of the story are laden throughout in such a way that it's so hard once you've got the full picture not to view it all in that context. So yeah, spoilers abound. We are not going to be careful about it.
I'm going to ask you a question that we asked Remy and Pinky yesterday, which is, hey Kim, what is 1000xRESIST?
How dare you? 1000xRESIST is it's so funny. I did actually do this for .zip recently amazing. As well. So I do feel like I'm actually primed, but it's something akin to a walking simulator, but is definitely narrative and dialogue heavy in the way of a, visual novel or something like that. It is a game about a society of clones that emerges after there has been an alien invasion on Earth that brings this disease that wipes out most of the population. All of these clones are descended from a young woman who was immune to the disease, who was named Iris. And the story of the game occurs some 1000 years after, that alien invasion and the beginning of Iris's journey. And there are many, many rich themes in this game about Iris's identity as the daughter of immigrants from Hong Kong who have come to Canada in the wake of the 2019-2020 protests in Hong Kong. So there's a lot about that narrative, the narrative of the protests and what it means to rebel and to resist oppression. There's pandemic narrative in there. There is a lot of like sci-fi kind of tropes. It manages to be many, many things at once. It's a story about like family and the relationship between parent and child, and somehow it manages to weave all of that together in an incredibly cohesive story that is only like 12 hours long and is the best game I've ever played, probably. One of the best narratives I think I've seen in any media ever, not even being hyperbolic.
Yeah, I actually do want to get into this. Let's do this right away.
Oh, yeah.
I think it has been compared, the game has been compared several times to games like 13 Sentinels, to Nier Automata. When we spoke to Remy and Pinky yesterday, we talked a lot about Kentucky Route Zero, which was kind of life affirming for me. But I know that you all, when you were doing asynchronous, played through 13 Sentinels and had some obvious criticism about it. I think that we all have. But I think the thing that made me realize how much you cared about this game was in Discord when you were talking about how it easily one-upped 13 Sentinels for you and was the probably one of the best games you've ever played. Tell me more.
Yeah. Oh, I will defend that decision till the day I die. 13 Sentinels, I think that we've seen a lot of people, I think, in the TWG community compare this game to 13 Sentinels. And I think the reason why is because they both use this kind of non-linear narrative structure. And in both cases, it creates a really compelling narrative because so much of what is, it's easy to latch on to a story when you're like, what the fuck is going on? I gotta know more, right? Like every chapter in 13 Sentinels ends on some kind of wild revelation that completely recontextualizes everything you've seen before. And I think that that's something that 1000 Times Resist shares. But the thing that for me elevated 1000 Times Resist so far above 13 Sentinels personally is the fact that 13 Sentinels is very much a story about media. Like at the end of the day, what that game is really saying, at least what I took away from it, is very much it's about sci-fi as a genre, and it is about the interconnections between those different narratives. And at the end, it's sort of like anything else I feel like it's saying is kind of like some amalgamation, because of the way that it's structured, some amalgamation of sci-fi kind of theming, right? Without any necessarily distinctive point of view, if I'm being brutally honest, I think.
Yeah.
Whereas 1000 Times Resist to me is a game that leads with something to say, and is constantly moving in. Everything in that game is to a narrative and thematic point. And there's, like I said, a lot of themes at play, but it all works very well. And at the end, for me at least, left me with so much to chew on in terms of so many different it had so much to say about the world in which we live and about our past and our future in a way that I just didn't really get out of 13 Sentinels. And so, they're both doing something similar in terms of the structure and how they tell a story, but then you get to the end of it, I think, with 1000 times resist, and I feel like the story that has been told is saying something kind of remarkable. Yeah, this no shade to 13 Sentinels. If you want to hear my very detailed thoughts about that, you can go listen to Asynchronous. But yeah, I
Yeah.
this is a game that I'm going to be thinking about for a very, very long time.
I think I'm also really curious for you about like what makes it probably the best game you've ever played, because I know you have very strong feelings about some games out there, and I don't know what is making you be so confident in saying that.
I think it is a combination of the that strong story and that strong theming, which is something you can get in any genre, right? And so like it just happens to do all of that stuff really well. It's this extraordinarily well written story. But on top of that, I think that in addition to that kind of non-linear structure, which I think is something you can achieve in a lot of different genres, but for some reason there's something about games and the interactivity of games that I think makes it work really well when you're trying to do something non-linear. But even more so, this game plays with game mechanics in an interesting way, which is always the thing that to me takes a game from like, okay, cool story, whatever, to like, oh, this is something that could not have been made in another medium. You know, the way that it plays with camera angles, sometimes it's a side scroller, sometimes it's top down, and the way that those things it's not like a major mechanical shift, but the change in perspective is so tied into kind of the themes of it that
Mm-hmm.
it's just so good every time.
Mm-hmm. One of the times that I realized how effective the game was at using both the theater background of the people involved in making it, as well as just like perspective in video games, was chapter 3, when really not for like the first time, but the first time like extremely intentionally we see the game become like a side scroller,
Mhm.
and it really sets you outside the perspective of Watcher, the main character that you're
Mhm.
playing at that point in the game. And for that chapter, really puts together like a myth making aspect, right? Uh,
Right.
I do want to recommend early. You've already talked a little bit about the aspect of this game that is about immigrants from Hong Kong specifically, but also just like Chinese diaspora,
Mhm.
greater East Asian diaspora. A piece that I know that you've read and that many people in the Discord have from Castel on co-host. I'll link it everywhere I can. It's called 1000xRESIST, is a game for a post 2019 Hong Kong protest generation of diaspora children that doesn't exist yet. Castel is Chinese Indonesian, and so doesn't have the sort of Chinese Canadian experience that the characters in this game or the people that made it do, but still wrote a lot about how the themes resonated with them in regards to their own experience, but also what they think it who they think it is for. Obviously from the title, I want to call out like one of the sort of like headlines of the piece. There's some context here. They're talking about like people who left Hong Kong and who have had children that are these first generation immigrants, and the context is those children,
Mhm.
and they say this game is for their children, the generation that has not been born yet.
Mhm.
Yesterday we talked a lot about the name 1000 times resist and like cycles of resistance and how it takes
Mhm.
a long time, several generations, to work out the problems of
Right.
like historical trauma, right?
Right.
And I don't know, I think that I've heard Remy talk enough about this Castell piece to understand that, like, I think he was surprised by the game that the thing that they had made. I think he agrees with this piece, but I don't know, I think that analysis of it is is in line with some of the conversations that we had yesterday, at least.
Mhm. I think too to reference back to our discussion a few minutes ago about the changing sort of like camera angles, and you know, you mentioned at some point suddenly it's a side scroller and you are seeing out Watcher from the outside in a way that you haven't necessarily before in the game. I think so much of this game is about the kind of fixed angles from which we see people in our lives, you know, especially parents, but I think in general, any person that you interact with in your life, you're only seeing them from one angle. And it is in many ways also about how do we view the past and how do we view those traumas that have been passed down from us. And there are points in this game where characters are given the opportunity to suddenly see something from an angle that they haven't seen before, because so much of this game is about memory and about being able to, as you identified, I think, in some of our discussions about this game, the idea that there are so many instances of someone in the game seeing a memory that is not theirs, and what you come away from when you do that, the kind of like more rounded image that you get of an event or of a person. And I feel like that this game is so much about how do we view this trauma from new angles, from a different perspective, in order to break out of the fixed angle that just has us kind of bringing it forward all the time. How do we move past it? It's a very heady game.
Yeah, I mean, you have names like Iris and Watcher, and
Mhm.
even Keeper is, I think, reminiscent of this idea of perspective. I actually think this is a great time to get into like the cast of characters.
Yes.
I guess we can start with Iris. Hecky Almo.
Hecky Grace, thank you, All Mother. I'm so sorry for everything that happened to you.
Yeah. So Iris is the person that was immune that you brought up earlier, that is sort of, I think, initially the interesting subject,
Mhm.
right? That some group of people have decided they are going to test on to try
Mhm.
to understand how to save the world from this disease that these aliens, the occupants, have brought.
Mhm.
But very quickly becomes a mother and a god, and all other kinds of roles to her clones or
Mhm.
children, right?
Yeah.
And she's definitely one that we see from multiple angles, different perspectives throughout the game, that really changes what we think about her.
Right. And the game sort of like mirrors the process of growing up and maturing and sort of like coming to the realization that your parents are three-dimensional people. At the beginning of the game, she is in this sort of elevated, godlike role, authoritative role. It's almost childlike in a way, and there's a very clear reason for that that we can get into in terms of how it is that Iris has become the All Mother in the eyes of this society of clones. It's a very sort of simplistic view of her that is, I think, as soon as you kind of grasp what's going on in the game, you just know, oh, this is begging to be challenged.
Mm-hmm.
And the game will play into that expectation of showing you, oh, maybe she wasn't so great. Maybe she was actually really complicated. Maybe she was kind of mean. Maybe, and then at some point you have to come back around and realize, like, but she was also a person, and there is so much more under the surface that you don't see when you are in that position of child looking up to parent.
Yeah, I will say this game is like pretty cleanly divided in half.
Mhm.
There is like a different cast of characters that kind of were introduced to in chapter 6, but the ones that we're talking about now will kind of run throughout. So
Mhm.
we've got Iris, and then we have a set of the world that these characters exist in is made up of clones of Iris. But in this society that has been built, there is Principal, who is their leader, as Iris, the All Mother, has gone, quote, to the other side. We don't really know what that is for for a long while. And Principal is kind of leading these clones in her stead. And then there are 5 of the sisters, as
Mhm.
they will call themselves, who are sort of elevated above the rest. And each of these sisters serves a function that
Mhm.
acts as their name. I think in the first chapter, when you're in a memory revisiting Iris's school, right, as the occupants have arrived and the disease has started to kill people, one of the first things that Watcher sees is a list of names on a chalkboard. She's like asking, what are these functions, right?
Mhm.
So we have Watcher, the player character, whose role is to observe. That is her function.
Mm-hmm.
I think we will learn a lot more about Watcher. I don't know that we need to like do too much discussing it right now.
I think it's enough to say that at the beginning of the game, Watcher is sort of the way that it works for the five sisters is that there are all of the clones are sort of given a function, but the idea is like you are training to maybe one day become the Watcher or the Knower. And the way that that happens is whoever is currently in that role for mysterious reasons will be called to the other side to join the All Mother, and then someone will come and take her place. And at the beginning of the game, Watcher is the kind of newest to her
Right.
role as one of those five head bitches in charge, for lack of a
Yeah.
better
She
and
has
so
seemingly just been like just graduated, I think is the term they
yeah,
use.
it's pretty recent. It's been long enough that she has developed a special relationship with Fixer, but it's definitely I think it's Healer makes allusions to like, oh, like you're the baby, you're the youngest
Mhm.
one among us.
Yeah.
And so Watcher is very much, she is about to learn so much more about what the world is really like. And this game, at least the first half of the game, is very much about what does she do with that knowledge.
Yeah. I think you led a little bit right into Fixer there. Fixer and Watcher have frankly, I believe, an intimate relationship.
I think that's pretty explicit.
Yeah.
Not explicit, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's in the text.
Yeah.
I think.
Fixer, her job is to fix things.
Mm-hmm.
We do see this like childhood drawing that is presumably from Iris at one point where she's describing the roles or the functions of these sisters.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems to be a way that like theoretically she set up this society. The Fixer that we meet is very I don't know. She's very brash, but she's also she's kind. It's not that, but she's very much like, I'm here to do what I want and enjoy myself and kind of fuck everybody else. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
and I'll bring along the people I want to bring with me. But like, if you're going to stop me, like, we're not friends.
Right. And you get senses early on that Fixer is a bit of a skeptic about, the way that the society is built.
Yeah. I think it's important to note that like when we begin the game, Fixer is being sent to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
It's wild how quickly they establish the relationship between her and Watcher.
Oh yeah, just immediately there's like a vibe. And I think the rest of the game, there are hints sort of dropped in each chapter that like, yes, they were in love. Like this is a intimate, romantic, and sexual relationship.
I mean, she gives her a vibrator at one point.
Yeah.
Like, and you also hear that like repeated in like, I can't remember which portion it was, but you hear the line about her talking about how like it tickles or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like in this moment where there's like a lot of other quotable things from the game happening. And I was like, oh, I was playing through it the second time. I was like, oh, they were laying it on thick. Like it's not even just insinuated.
Yeah.
The first time we see Fixer is when she's being sent to the other side. She's waiting on her train and she's standing there with Watcher on the train platform. And they're talking about what they're not talking about is how much they're going to miss each other. Right. But that's what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. And they're arguing about how like Fixer has not told Watcher that she's leaving. She has that line. She's like, "You're here anyway, aren't you?" I don't know. I've heard an interview where Remy was talking about how like he asked that they not do these like moments that are based on really tiny action because that's really difficult to make in video games. Yeah. And then I watched this scene and I'm like, okay, but what is this?
Yeah. It's very much like a very small moment that is full of meaning that is not said. And it comes so early in the game too that like on top of the huge questions that it raises about the relationship between the characters, you're also just like, what's going on? Like, she's getting on a train to meet mom. You have no context yet. The way that it sort of drops you in media res, but it is such an effective way to immediately grab your attention. before I played this game, AJ, also of .zip, streamed just the first chapter of it, and that was my
That's what made me play this game.
Yeah, me too. It was my first exposure to it, and it's just immediately so interesting. Like they do such a good job of spoon feeding you information that makes you really want to sink your teeth into it. And this scene is a perfect example of that.
Yeah. I think we can use this scene to talk about a couple of the others at least.
Sure.
Nowhere is the first sister that you run into as Watcher.
Mm-hmm.
She's standing outside like the path to the train station, telling Watcher to go down and make sure that you find Fixer before she leaves. I think she says the line that gets repeated several times in this scene is like, is there any feeling worth getting incinerated for? The idea being that when sisters die, they're incinerated, but also incineration is used as a punishment.
Mm-hmm.
I think theoretically, this gets into questions of like what the game is telling you up front and what is actually happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. We never see any evidence of incineration ever actually occurring, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
We will find out eventually that when sisters go to the other side, things are different than
right.
what is represented to them. And so, incineration is kind of this looming threat that is sort of used for purposes of control, but is not very clearly actually something that is ever done.
Yeah.
But yeah, Nowhere is very much a person who eschews that kind of sentimentality in favor of, her protecting her self-interest, as we will see sort of throughout. I also want to talk about the introduction of BBF in this scene. Bang Bang Fire, or BBF, is the head of security, essentially. And I just love the depiction of this character, where it would have been so easy to lean on the trope of like, oh yeah, she's like a tough, a tough lady, that sort of trope you get of the strong female character that always sucks. And instead, BBF, who is ostensibly, this badass fighter, is kind of a pacifist, and kind of what we would sort of consider to be like a crunchy granola type, like, she's seen meditating. She is very much someone who seems to have like a spirituality about her, and she's what I think probably my favorite of all of the sisters. I appreciate so much that they decided to like break the mold with her in such interesting ways, and not just in a haha, isn't it funny that she's a pacifist? It's a real genuine part of her character that informs her development as well.
Yeah, I mean, the end of the game, she's having to kill people and like is really revolted by it, right?
Yeah.
And the last one is Healer. I think I enjoy watching Healer more than I enjoy most of watching the other sisters.
Yeah.
I think it's probably just because like she reacts the most probably like me. A lot of her relationship with Watcher is like begging Watcher to have feelings. Healer, her job is what it sounds like. She is there as the medic essentially. But also interestingly, a lot of the work that she's doing as a part of her function is like actively testing on shells, which are like the bodies of sisters before like they are. I don't know at what stage that she's testing on them. I think at one point she talks about like she like threatens somebody as being used as like a test subject essentially. But you like will walk into like her work area and there will be just like blood splattered everywhere.
Or a shell is actively like seizing on the table as you're there. Yeah.
She, while being obviously not so turned off by the gross, like kind of physical realities of being a person, at the same time is someone, I think she knows as much as Nowhere knows about what's going on, but just has a completely different perspective on it, right? Where Nowhere wants to protect her own interests, Healer is begging for anyone else to give as much of a shit as she does.
Right. I love Healer so much because I feel like this is another depiction of a character that could have been very one note, and they managed to make her extremely like dense,
Mhm.
not in terms of like intelligence, but
Yeah.
I mean in terms of like just a depth of character to her,
Right.
where you see her doing these experiments and she's sort of dismissive to Watcher at the beginning, and it gives you a sense of like, oh, is she just like kind of cold and mean? And what you find out is that under the surface, Healer is deeply empathetic and pained by the pain of any sister,
Mhm.
but doing what she feels she needs to do for this kind of greater good. And I just find her so fascinating,
Yeah.
the idea that she spends so much time and energy into inflicting this like pain on
Mhm.
these shells, but it is all for her, out of her like love for her sisters and desire for a better society. There are no easy answers in this game, right? Like
Right.
there are very few things in this game that where the morality of the situation is kind of handed to you, and Healer's a
Yeah.
great example of that.
I think it's interesting what Healer is trying to do through her experimentation. She is trying to restore the immunity to this disease that the
Mhm.
first generation of sisters had. At some point, it's I don't remember exactly how it's stated, but it is understood that at some point, some people in the society other than Iris were
Mhm.
immune to this disease that has killed everyone on the surface. And one thing that is not obvious in this medium is that all of these people are walking around at all times with like giant mech looking masks on their face.
Mhm.
You do not see their mouths with the exception of Watcher, whose mask is clear. It's like these people are not eating food, right? They're
Mhm.
getting nutrients injected into them.
Right.
They cannot take their mask off or they will not survive. And
Mhm.
Healer is looking for a way to make everyone immune,
Right.
and that is why she's doing the things she's doing, like mutilating like fresh shells in her lab.
Mhm.
I want to get into some of the chapters.
Yeah, this feels like a great jumping off
Yeah,
point because so much of that first chapter is about the disease and the
yeah.
beginning of that pandemic.
So the first four chapters are they're communions. We can talk about what a communion is later, but essentially it's revisiting a memory that Iris had.
Right.
It's an experience that Iris had that Watcher is getting to observe, and she's doing these communions with each of her sisters. So the first four chapters, the first is with Principal, the second is with Bang Bang Fire, the third is with Heal.